Let's make it our business. A climate podcast that's about innovators, change makers, and entrepreneurs who are taking actions, creating solutions, and inspiring many. This podcast is supported by US Department of State, created by BBC Media Action, India.
Home is a feeling, a shelter, a cocoon. Here are a few lines by a poet, Ahmad Mushtaq. पता अब तक नहीं बदला हमारा, वही घर है वही किस्सा हमारा. These few lines beautifully capture this universal need that we all are so emotionally attached to. But isn't this planet our home too? And in making one home, shouldn't we be careful not to harm the other one? Today, we explore how architecture plays an important role in climate change. And to talk about how construction and design can help cool it down, we have Dr. Anshu Sharma, co-founder of STS Global. For the past 30 years, he has worked extensively amongst communities in India, Afghanistan, Haiti, and more, helping build resilience through construction based on local wisdom and technology. Thank you so much and welcome to Cool It Down. We talk about greenhouse gases and we often talk about obvious things like fossil fuels, methane from food waste, fueling it to construction. But data tells us that 37% of the global greenhouse gases comes from the building and construction sector. What is behind this staggering share? Is it the material, transport, energy used, or more?
Okay, I think that's a great point to start from, to look at where we are contributing, often unconsciously. And if we look at the houses that we live in, so I'm right now sitting in my own house in Delhi, which is a typical concrete and brick mortar house. I think most of us are in such houses now. But if we look back at the kind of houses that probably our grandparents used to live in, and you start comparing, you would find two very clear bins that have gone far away from where they used to be. One of this, which we called embodied energy, is the energy that is consumed for building this house. And as you rightly said, that is building materials. And very often now your building materials come from very far away.
That's right.
They are produced in ways that consume a lot of energy and they give off a lot of pollution, all kinds of gases, which could include steel, it could include cement. In fact, at times we are even importing materials, so now there's this new imported stone and glass that is being used. So imagine what all went into producing it in big factories where it was made and then transporting it from there to your place, right? So all of it gets added and the energy used, all the machines that run to build these houses, that gets added. And the day your house is complete, the entire set of energy that was used to make it is what we call embodied energy. Keep comparing it with what used to happen a couple of generations ago. All materials were local. A lot of this was hand-done stuff, very little transportation. And that's where we've really bumped up the energy that we use and the emissions that we produce while making a house. And then comes an ongoing role. So, on a literal daily basis, when you're using energy to either light up your house or to ventilate it or to cool it in the summers or to heat it in the winters, all of that gets added. So every year you use a certain amount of energy across the seasons to keep your house comfortable. And that's what we keep adding year on year. And as we keep adding more houses, as we keep getting higher with our aspirations and our affluence, and we just do more of that, that's what keeps getting added. And that's the 37% that you see on the figures, Sayema.
Anshu, I'm very curious to, understand this. You've spoken about how we were doing certain things right, just like, 2 generations back, and we have gone far away from the conventional or the traditional ways, which often now when we look back were the right ways to go about it. What has happened? Have we become more greedy? What is the major difference that you see in the attitude, everything around you?
A lot, Sayema. I think you've touched upon some of these things. I think it would be a little cruel to say everyone's gone greedy, because I think a lot of this is being done subconsciously. People don't even realize what they're doing. You walk out of your house and you know that your air conditioner is spewing hot air outside,
Yeah.
But I guess in our race to, do well, do better, and the kind of aspirations that we have set for ourselves as a society, as families, as individuals, I guess that drive to do well economically has become so overpowering that these pieces that are just whizzing past us are becoming invisible to us. So I would feel we need to talk about more of sensitivity. Probably we've become too focused on certain thing and lost that view of the larger picture, lost the view of what the world around us means to us, and that focus has become a little too narrow. And I guess a lot of this is philosophical, a lot of this is educational, and what we're seeing in the buildings is only one manifestation of that, Sayema.
Right. So we certainly need to be shaken up. What gives you hope, Anshu? With architecture used to both, combat climate change, and is it the communities that you're working with? What is your source of hope?
So I've spent my entire career working around disasters and extreme climate events. So I've been to all kinds of places that have been hit by cyclones, floods, even earthquakes.
Interesting.
The one thing that makes me the most hopeful is that, we may not have recorded this in history and we may not be aware, but somewhere our forefathers and our foremothers have been through various kinds of crisis phases, and they did learn really well. And they did it without the means that are available to us today. So just to give you an example, about 2010, there was a major flood in the mountain desert of Leh, and we were working there, and we landed up and we saw complete devastation, mud flows. We knew this is highly earthquake prone, a region. And we're sitting and wondering, what kind of tech and how do you bring it to such a remote area? And then one morning we just go for a stroll and we look at the Leh Palace, and we said, oh my God, they had everything sorted out 400 years ago, 500 years ago. Similarly, Uttarkashi, the flood zone, you look at, houses that were built 800, they're dated 800 to 1000 years old. And you see what can be interpreted in very modern engineering as how they were dealing with shaking foundations and the structures and all. So they must have gone through a really bad series of phases and learned from each one of those. In fact, nowadays what we do is we try to look at how we learn in the future. We try to break that down, and I guess the best lessons will come from older ways of doing things, and we need to pepper them and really bolster them up with the newer technologies that we find. So in summary, my one hope is that, Granddad's done it before us, and we have more technology and more wisdom around us and better ways to network, and we should be able to do it again.
And that we should understand that that's way cooler than how we are today. Anshu, quickly, you've got to give me individual targets and individual directions. As an individual, what can I do in my daily life, or maybe when I'm imagining my sapno ka ghar or the dream house? What are the practices that must be right, which will contribute in a healthy way to my planet?
Okay, I'm going to twist your question around a bit, Sayema. I think practices, there are a plenty that we've seen, most of us are aware of. We can find them easily online, and I can also rattle off a few. I think it's more important to fix our principles.
Yeah.
If you got your principles right, you will find your practices. They will be around you everywhere, and your insights will tell you what the right practice is going to be.
I'm
and let
so
me break the
glad
principles.
you said
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. But then I do also talk about principles from how we look at this whole concept of what's going wrong and how do we fix it. Some of our work, we colloquially use the term resilience, and we've tried to break it down. So earlier we used to talk a lot about the resilience as the ability to bounce back, right? And in the architecture world, we use bamboo a lot. A lot of us are enamored with bamboo, how it's very flexible, and houses made with bamboo can literally bounce back. But then over time, we've learned that just the ability to bounce back is, it's putting a lot on your shoulders. Anything will come your way, and boss, you have to bounce back. And if we break it down into, let's say, 3 broad categories, and this is actually a definition, I'm simplifying it, but a definition used by the International Red Cross. And they say resilience is the ability to anticipate, to absorb, and to adapt.
Wow.
And where we miss out, and so if you're going to build a house, I would say anticipate, try to figure out what will go wrong. and how can you build your defenses around that, right? And that will be a very interesting inquiry, because you can't anticipate, your architect or engineer cannot anticipate sitting somewhere else. You're going to be in that situation. You may anticipate stuff that will happen with your neighbors or in your neighborhood. You may anticipate in your city. You may anticipate broader things. So applying your mind on anticipation, which will be a great thing for life in general, not just if you're building your house, but how you're going to deal with tomorrow. We look at weather forecasts, but that's one tip of anticipating. Let's anticipate what it'll do to us. And the second part is being able to absorb it. So if something is going to go wrong, what measures can I put in place to be able to absorb that? And very lastly, to adapt here means how do you learn from what is going wrong, what keeps going on around you or to you, and how do you process that to make it happen? So it becomes a thinking process. And I think if you then try to convert this into practices, if you're in Delhi, there will be a set of practices around how to consume, how to regenerate things, how to recycle things, how to reduce your energy consumption. If you're in the mountains, if you're in the coast, your practices will keep changing. And there's a lot that can happen around that. Sayema?
Oh, yes. Anshu, I think, you've just summed it up so beautifully. Where there's a will, there's a way. We've got to first develop the will. And I think, it's all about just going the right way rather than being apologetic about our choices, the cosmetic choices that we did not adopt. We need to flaunt it. We need to actually say, we've done this, we're doing this for our Mother Earth. What about the entrepreneurs, Anshu? They are very keenly listening to you. They have the passion, they have the conviction, but is there money out there?
There absolutely is. We started talking about the construction sector, and we often keep saying that more than half of the build space we will need in the next 30 years is yet to be built, right? So there's going to be a lot of building around us. There's going to be a lot of new jobs that will get created. There will be a lot of concerns around how, stuff will happen with newer things that we produce and consume. And I think there is a huge scope. This is the perfect time to be a young entrepreneur. In fact, with the startup ecosystem coming up and being promoted in such a big way.
Wow.
I would really say, it's there's opportunities literally everywhere that you see. And I would say if we can start looking at a little longer term into the future and say, if things are going to change so fast, including the good stuff that is happening, where tech is going to take us, including the bad stuff that may happen, where the climate is going to take us, we find huge gaps within that really need to be filled. Our current solutions are not going to work. As we say, the past is not going to tell us how the future will be. That's how the climate is changing. The past solutions are not going to work for the future. So if you break it down into any piece, any kind of, pieces from whatever sector you pick, I come from the architecture and planning world. How do we cool buildings without heating the air around them? How do we create beautiful aspirational buildings that use old principles and we still use modern materials and technologies? How do we help people learn? So we often don't talk about learning in a very big way in these very hardcore sectors. But there's opportunities in, as I said, anticipating and figuring out what the future holds. There's opportunities in trying to make systems more resilient, and there's opportunities in trying to help people learn better. I think I have a lot of hope from all of these three directions to take. Sayema?
It's fascinating to hear the same thing everywhere. It's important to feel good more than look good. I think the moment we start feeling good, everything good is going to happen around us. More power to you, Anshu. Thank you so much for doing so much for the future of our planet. We intend to join in this very second. Thank you so much for joining me on Cool It Down.
Thank you, Sayema. Pleasure being here with you.
Today we explore a topic that quite literally shapes the way we live: architecture. Buildings are not just spaces we occupy. They have a profound impact on our environment, from the materials used to the energy consumed and even the way they interact with the land around them. To guide us through this fascinating conversation, I'm thrilled to introduce our guests, Marion Weiss and Michael Manfredi. Weiss, Manfredi, as they are known, are leaders in the field of architecture and urban design, renowned for their innovative work that seamlessly integrates landscape and building. Their projects not only push the boundaries of design but also champion sustainability, creating spaces that respond to the changing needs of our planet. Marion, Michael, welcome to Cool It Down.
Glad to be here.
It's wonderful to be here.
All right. My first question, and anyone can take this question. You guys have worked on projects around the world, but let's focus on India. Can you share what your latest project here is, and how did the climate crisis shape your approach to designing it?
We're very honored to be able to work on the U.S. Embassy renovation in New Delhi, India. And it's a place where the idea of being able to bring contemporary thoughts about sustainability into the reframing of it as a diplomatic campus has been really both a timely and once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I think to follow up on that question, one of the things that we're super excited about is that this project is an opportunity to really think of a number of sustainable strategies. Some of them very ancient to India. I think India offers great lessons in terms of how to think of the preciousness of water, for example, the importance of shade. Mm-hmm. So we are, for example, to give you two elements of the project that both have aesthetic value is we're capturing water and actually holding it in large underground cisterns so that when there's a dry period, the water can be reused. And thinking about water as precious is, I think, for us, and I think for all of us, something that we must, in a way, foreground. The other aspect is we're taking the traditional jolly screen, which is, I think, so historically rooted in the earlier architecture of India, reinventing it so that we can control the shade, control the heat in a series of interior spaces. So those two methodologies we find both very, very beautiful, but also great lessons and in a way offer opportunities to think about those lessons as we create innovative architecture.
That sounds really interesting, but how do you choose sustainable or low carbon materials for your projects? Are there any new materials you're excited about using?
You know, one of the things that we're very excited about using is, in many ways, the most ancient and obvious material, which is the earth.
Interesting.
And if we think about something that people often are very focused on the actual materials and, you know, using low fly ash and, in steel, for instance, and we're taking all of those into consideration. But most importantly, we're using the earth as a material to cool a building. And roughly 1/3 of the program that we are developing to really house the diplomatic team that works on site is by locating a lot of those offices on a lower level within the earth with sunken courtyards that draw light into these places, enables us to take advantage of the constant 53-degree temperature of the earth.
Wow.
To keep our buildings from having to be so aggressively heated or cooled. And again, it's the question of materiality, but it's form as well. For instance, in what will really house most of the hardworking efforts that serve as the embassy's mission, the main building has a very, very large canopy that extends out over the entry, cooling the exterior environment, complemented by a skim of water at the base where one effectively enters almost across a bridge.
Right.
And that is offering evaporative cooling that by displacement air ventilation between the shade and the displacement air over the water, we're effectively providing some outdoor cooling opportunities prior to entering an air-conditioned environment. So, we think about all the materials sometimes with too great of a focus without thinking about the passive systems that first are going to help us reduce the demand on energy use.
Would you like to add anything to that,
Yes,
Michael?
I would. I think there's, to build on Marion's point, many of these very traditional opportunities that we've looked at around the world, but particularly in India, are in fact very ancient. But now we have computational technologies that can really establish the metrics against which these ancient technologies can be brought into the future. And that's what's very exciting to us. The opportunity to use simple technologies that have been proven over centuries, but now kind of in a way allowing contemporary monitoring technologies to establish the efficacy of these systems. So evaporative cooling, we can kind of tell how much moisture is in the air, how much moisture is not in the air. Marion mentioned the very, very large roof canopy. That would only be possible with new technologies in terms of structural steel and concrete. So in a way, the idea of shading a building is ancient, but doing it through a very, very significant cantilever canopy is new technologies, new structural technologies.
And I guess that's the hallmark of Weiss and Marion, I mean, the amalgamation of traditional and contemporary methods approach, I think that's so unique to you guys. Public spaces play a big role in protecting cities from climate impacts. How do you see the role of public spaces changing as cities face climate challenges?
One of the things that's very exciting to think about, many cities that have been located on the water's edge are now vulnerable in new ways. And they were placed there in often because they were places of exchange and ports, but they've become robust destinations that are now vulnerable to sea level rise. With the desire to bring people to the water's edge for recreation and pleasure, there's also the need to make more durable and resilient those water's edges. And so we're extremely interested in being able to welcome the temporal flux of rising waters and even flooding and design into the protective measures that we look at for developing effectively these fortifications out in the water that also become pleasurable places to walk. At Hunters Point South Waterfront Park, that fortification is really a hill within the water that creates an interesting journey, but it also protects a wetland that, together with that natural revetment that's been now hosting plants, it's also protecting the upland development of an urban community that could not have been built had there not been some additional protective measures. Within there, public spaces like a public green also are elements that actually take in flooding and have water collection tanks below and have catch and release systems that actually let the water come in and depart and still allow that recreational gathering place that's public to remain useful.
The other area that is, I think, globally an increasing challenge is the reality that pandemics, our last COVID pandemic, are likely to repeat themselves. And what we had discovered, and I think this is proven scientifically as well, is the importance of outdoor space, airflow, was absolutely crucial. And often, particularly in North America and in parts of India too, Mumbai and other areas, buildings too, sadly, have been completely sealed and air conditioned. And while there's a certain efficiency to monitoring the temperature, the challenge then is when there's a pandemic, diseases can spread much more easily when they're in unventilated spaces. So, for example, we designed a concert hall and museum in Florida, an area with climate very much like India, very warm, humid, heavy rains. And during the pandemic, we had designed a very beautiful courtyard. During the pandemic, they were able to host outdoor concerts.
Wow.
And what was beautiful about that was not only the sort of sense of being outside, but outside and safe. And that proved absolutely essential. And for us, a great lesson in the reciprocity between indoor spaces and outdoor spaces.
Wow.
I just want to add one more element there, is that infrastructure is now becoming not only a necessity for protecting cities and keeping people moving, but a protagonist for, with so little remaining land, a protagonist for locating new public spaces. And so even in the Olympic Sculpture Park in Seattle, train lines and highways and a failing seawall were the problem that kept people from enjoying the waterfront and separating them so radically. And so adding a new landscape level, a 200,000 cubic yards of earth landform that could get us over the train tracks and over the highway, and developing a fortification that also provided salmon habitat to reinforce the seawall, became a very simple move to say, we might need to add one more layer to our infrastructure to create new public destinations that, particularly as Michael mentioned during the pandemic, the world outdoors has never been more important to be able to give attention to.
That's really interesting. Michael, I'd like to understand this. What are some of the best global practices in sustainable architecture that have helped with climate issues? Are there any that individuals can also adopt?
Well, we always believe that the bottom-up approach sometimes, is more successful than a top-down approach. Singapore, for example, which is a very unique, has a very unique governmental structure, has been very, very successful in establishing kind of a green architecture. Their success in some ways is because the function, the administrative function of Singapore is rather unique. On the other hand, here in the United States, we're starting to discover that the ability to bring indoor plants, however modest, has a very, very significant health impact, both emotional health and physical health. So the idea of biophilia, the sense that nature provides a level of physical and emotional comfort, is now medically proven to be important. So I think what's happening in this country and other countries, people in their own homes, through very modest means, are bringing plantings inside. And that's a very small but very, very important measure that in aggregate, if you multiply it times millions and millions of people, can start to have a significant environmental effect. And we're also seeing that it's very important in areas that have lots of rainfall to encourage pervious surfaces in driveways, for example, or in streets. And we had explored that at Hunter's Point. So the idea that pervious pavers allow water to percolate instead of just washing and causing flooding, that's happening in neighborhood by neighborhood. So we're encouraged by the bottom-up approach as much as we are by the top-down approach.
I think that the bottom-up and top-down is an important thing to think about. People in California, for instance, have been getting some rebates to be able to have solar panels put on their roofs, and that's good for the environment. And there's, in a sense, that government support to enable that to work. They've also been encouraged to use less water so that they're coming forward not with beautiful lawns that just gorgeously consume an excess of water, but actually sustainable dry or xeriscape, which is what it's called. That's on a sort of a residential level. But most importantly, and Michael and I both teach, I teach at Penn, Michael at Harvard, we are really excited to encourage our students to be active voices and to be political voices and recognize that as individuals, their insights, their understanding, and their collective voice has an impact on ultimately on policy that needs to, as Michael said, take some of the kinds of insights that, say, Singapore had to advocate for and create opportunities for resilient and green design to come forward. We too, as young generations especially, and even our generations, can collectively be a voice, develop a momentum that says this is the right thing to do as individuals and the right thing to do as a country.
Marion, Michael, guide our young architects who are tuned in right now. What are the opportunities in focusing on sustainability in their work?
I'll start in part because this is really important to us with our staff and with our students. This is a moment that is better than ever to be able to think hard about how to innovate in the way we address resilience, conservation, preservation, and we now have tools that this generation in particular have access to, fluency in, that are at a very high analytical level, assessing some of the more visceral and tactile and artistic visions that we might have. So to be able to look at the metrics of what it takes to be carbon neutral, to use less energy, to use less materials is intuitively the right thing to do, but we now have the computational tools to make that a rigorous and accessible path forward.
I would add maybe a thought to that. When we were in architecture school, the generation that preceded us never mentioned climate. It was just a word that never entered the lexicon of architecture. I think in our generation, it became a little bit more important. And what we're seeing as teachers, the students are coming to us being hungry to learn the tools that will allow them in large ways, administrative ways, but also very specific ways in their own smaller projects to affect issues of climate. So I think what is so encouraging to us and what we would always tell our students is that generationally, now there's a sense of a kind of collective mandate to address climate change through architecture.
That's absolutely terrific. And I think as individuals, as entrepreneurs, there's a lot that we can do, and we should. That wraps up today's episode of Cool It Down. A big thank you to Marion and Michael for sharing their insights on how architecture can truly be a driving force in combating climate change. As we've heard, the buildings and spaces we create today will shape the future of our cities and our planet. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining in. As we've heard today, sustainability starts with small, everyday choices. You don't need to be an architect to make a difference. Whether it's greening your space, using eco-friendly materials, or reducing energy use, every action matters. We've got to ask ourselves, what's one change we can make today to help cool down the planet? And for the entrepreneurs out there, the future is already here. Green construction, renewable energy, eco-innovations, they're not just environmental solutions, they are opportunities. If you've got an idea, now's the time to turn it into something big. So that's it for now. You've heard the best voices in the business, and they have given us enough building blocks to help cool it down. As individuals and as entrepreneurs, it's never too late to start, nor too early. But there are many more climate connections to make, many more climate positive steps to take. Keep checking back for more. This is your host, Sayema, signing off.
Cool it down. Let's make it our business.